Hey everybody, Joe from Treadmill Heroes here. Today is refurbing Life Fitness Club Series Treadmill Day. We had a customer call us. They just said, pick me out a good one, get it refurbished, we'll take it. I came across this one. Cosmetically, it looks like it's in pretty good shape. It's got an out of order sign on it from the previous facility that it was in. I have no idea what's wrong with it, but I'm gonna tear this thing apart, put all new parts on it, make it run like it's a new unit, and hopefully give some service tips along the way. So we're gonna work on this thing in real time and get it refurbed and fixed. So I got it plugged in, let's power it on and let's just see what's going on here. Click, maybe a beep. Okay, we got a beep. All right, let's just see here what's going on. So far the console shows like it's working like normal. I'm gonna hit the start button. Incline is resetting. Begin workout. 3, 2, 1, it's counting down. And it's working. So we gotta figure out why they got rid of this. I'm gonna first start by messing with the incline. I'm gonna move this over here so you guys can see it. So the belt's moving okay. I'm gonna go ahead and adjust the incline. Now I do hear, it's a real gravelly sound. Sometimes this will come from just normal wear and tear. Sometimes this comes from a waxed deck being silicone lubricated. And when that happens, a lot of times the pores in the belt are already plugged up, and by adding silicone, it can make like a gravelly sound, which at that point, if you're doing that, it's probably time to replace the belt anyway. Let me mess with the elevation here and see what's going on. I'm gonna take this thing all the way up. Now, the tread's not necessarily gonna go up all the way because I've got the incline carriage hanging off the front of the cart here. And, I don't know if you can see it, but the incline carriage is going down. Let's just see if it goes all the way down and all the way up. I'm a big fan of getting all the weight off of the incline carriage when you're working on something like this here, because what that allows you to do is if you have to replace the lift motor, you don't have all the weight of the treadmill pushing down on the ends of the arm gear or the housing of the lift motor. Tread went all the way up to 15. I'm taking it back down. My guess is they might have marked this out of order just because it was making a nasty noise. The other thing that could have happened was this could have been just shutting off during a workout from it getting overheated from too much drag, too much friction. I'm almost wondering if the belt and the deck are shot underneath of this thing. So we're going to take a look at the belt and deck. Okay, since we're going to replace the belt and deck anyway on this thing, I want to find out what's going on and if this was actually creating a lot of drag from maybe a worn out belt and deck. I did notice this belt is extremely tight, but since we're getting rid of this, I'm just going to cut this belt off. Just take your pocket knife. Here's what a belt should not look like underneath of a treadmill. And these belts are new, they're white. There's a cotton backing on the back of these belts here. And over time, dirt and debris get underneath of there, and these pores inside the cotton backing get clogged. And so they can't absorb any lubricant, any wax, and then that creates a really harsh, almost like a sandpaper surface on the deck itself. So if you take the belt off, here you're gonna see on the deck a lot of grooves in here. What we're seeing is all this pitting. These decks are nothing special. They're nothing more than particle board with a really thin layer of melamine that's basically glued onto there. It's basically like a slick plasticky surface. And it should be smooth like glass. If you look on the back side of the treadmill deck here, this is nice and smooth. Here it's all grooved and pitted because this is where your feet hit when you're walking on the tread. So we're going to go ahead and replace the running belt and we got to pull this deck off. So the first thing you need to do is take off these little caps that follow down the upright tube here. They're held on by a Phillips head screw. All the screws that hold these caps on and the sides of the motor hood here are the same with the plastic end caps on the front and the back. However, the screws that hold this front fin on right here, those are metal screws. These are wide threaded plastic screws that are actually going into a little plastic insert inside of the metal frame. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to accidentally get these screws mixed up with the screws that hold this front clip on. These are sometimes stuck in there, so sometimes you just got to give a little hit from side to side and they'll come right out. I've seen technicians ram that plastic screw through here, and you can get it to go in, but it'll mess up the threading. Sometimes the head of the screw gets rounded off, and then you end up having to bust the plastic. It's a mess. Now we're going to take our hood off. Pulls right out of there, and we're going to look for some clues inside of here. Okay, one thing that I'm seeing right out of the gate here is this. This is the tension arm bracket. This makes me feel good because I know this has been replaced, and I can tell you it's been replaced because there is a Life Fitness aftermarket part sticker and part number on here. There's really nothing wrong with this bracket itself, but behind here is the little tension wheel that pushes down on the drive belt. Sometimes this starts to wear, it doesn't stay centered on the ribs, or it'll just start to make a lot of noise. Here's your tension wheel here. This is also, there's a little bearing inside of here, not necessarily a bearing, but a little bushing in here that'll start to make some noise. How do you get to this? Because this is very spring loaded to keep a ton of tension down on there. Well, first thing you do, they put a little notch here. You can either use a claw hammer or a pair of pliers like this and reach your claw into there like this and bend it back. It's very spring loaded. You got to be careful because guys get their finger caught in here and it's really bad. Like that will hurt. So I've seen guys pry back on this and try to get their finger in there and pull this belt out. That's very dangerous to do. So there's a reason for this little hole right here and this hole here. It's for when you pry this back. Take a little Allen wrench like this. You can fit that through there, fit it all the way through. There's a hole on the back side. And then looky there. He's up out of the way. You can get in here. You can replace your tension wheel. You can replace your belt. You can get in there and put it on the drive motor pulley inside of there without having to disconnect the spring in there because it's a pain to get that spring reconnected the right way. So at this point, now I can get in here and remove the belt. You need to do this anyway if you're going to replace just the running belt because you got to get the front roller off of there. So this is a good tip. Make sure to utilize that hole. That thing's up out of the way and you're going to be good. Then you can reach in here and get this belt off of the drive pulley, off of the drive motor without worrying about your hand getting cut off. There we go. So now we can take that off. Or once we unscrew this bolt here. So it's a 9/16 socket right here. Take that out. This side with the pulley does not have any anchoring, it just fits in the hole. And then out he comes. Another little tip for you, leave the old drive belt hanging on the front roller until it's time to put this back on. Because what's going to happen is you're going to put the running belt back on the treadmill. You're going to have this already in place. You're going to have the rear roller back in, and then you're going to realize you didn't put the drive belt on, and then you got to take the rear roller back off, slide this back out, put the drive belt on, and start all over again. So leave him hanging on there as a reminder. You got to replace it with the new drive belt. Next up, we're going to focus our attention on the rear roller. I'm going to spin this thing around so we can look at the rear roller. We've got the rear end caps. This is also a very common piece that gets broken in the clubs. People walk by and they end up kicking these and they break off. So if you're replacing the running belt on one of these treadmills and the deck, you don't need to take these off. But since we're refurbing these, I like to pull these off and make sure there's not a bunch of dust and debris and junk in here. And also what we like to do is we like to run our air hose through here back and forth, and it blows all the debris out that hides inside of these frames. If we're going to do our due diligence and do a good job refurbing this, we want to make sure that all the dust bunnies are cleaned out. Okay, we got the rear end caps off. Now I'm going to go ahead and take these roller, basically these are here to make sure there's no gap in between the deck belt where somebody could, well, I don't even know if somebody could get hurt with that, but there would be a little gap there. So we take these off here. These are directional, so they will go on the right or the left side. So we're going to continue on here with this rear guides. So next up, we're going to take this rear roller off here. And it is absolutely worth noting that if you have a rear roller that has been in its original state since its inception here, you want to make sure to put the rear roller back on the same side that you took it off, because if this bearing right here, which is on the user left side of the treadmill, has always been on the user left side, if this roller gets turned around when you go and reinstall it, you're at risk of this bearing starting to make some noise. And so you want to make sure that you mark one side of the rollers. What I like to do sometimes is I'll just take my knife and I'll just score a little spot on here, and I know that that is the user left on the tread. Mark it however you want, but before you take this off, mark the roller. Then you can just take this out of there. I also would recommend, if you can, try to clear off as much hair and fuzz and junk on the back end of this bolt before you start threading it through. Otherwise, it'll get jammed up in the threads there. The other nice part about cutting the belt off is there's no tension on this. If you're taking this off with tension already on the roller, let's say you're just replacing the roller and not necessarily replacing the belt for some reason, just do a couple turns on this side and then a couple turns on this side, and that way you're not putting too much pressure on one side by unscrewing this side. You can bend the bolt, and you can actually do some damage to the roller pin in there. And we'll just remove this bolt. I am noticing that that bolt is kind of difficult to get out, so I'm kind of curious as to why. This side's coming out nice and easy. This side is not. And I have seen technicians cross-thread this bolt and still be able to ram it through there, but I'm seeing a little bit of Loctite on this bolt. Now it's starting to break loose a little bit. Feels pretty good. 1 and 2. Rollers out. I know this is my user left. We're going to clean all this up. We're going to pull all that out of there. We're going to air hose blow this all off of there. Rear rollers are going to gather a lot of debris. This is a combination of some wax that the manufacturer put on, and dirt, debris, hair, you name it. All kinds of stuff gets pulled underneath the running belt, and then it'll gather on the rear roller. In general, this one's pretty clean, but you get all these little bumps on here. And when you run your treadmill, you're going to hear like a thud sound, like a blah, 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 blah. It's like a vibrating, kind of thumping sound. This stuff needs to be cleaned off. The best thing to use is like an old hotel room key that you've probably got 1,000 of these laying around. Take your room key, scrape all that debris off of there, go all the way around the roller. I mean, just that little bit, getting tons of that stuff off of there. Okay, it's time to remove the deck. You're going to need a 4mm wrench. Make sure you use the 4mm. These bolts here will plague you. When you go to take these out, make sure your Allen wrench fits in nice and tight. It almost will snap in there. And then you can remove your 4 bolts, the 2 on the back and the 2 on the front. They don't go in very far into the Tinnerman clip that is attached to the little shock absorber that's underneath of here. These should be in there nice and snug. Now, because I haven't cheated and looked, we're going to find out if this deck has ever been flipped before. And here comes the moment of truth. It has not. So here is the underneath side of a deck that has never been flipped. That right there, that, my friends, is a factory wax coating on the back side of the deck. So this can be flipped. But since we're refurbing this treadmill, we're going to put a brand new deck on here anyway. This would be one that if you have a club, this one can be reused. I also want to show you here, if you look close, that deck is a little warped, got a little bow in it. That's just from being ran on. So if it humps down one way, it's going to hump up the other way, because there's no holes in the middle to sock it back down to make it nice and tight. Now, I'll give you a little tip here. If you want to know if the deck has never been flipped before, without actually going to all that work, I can show you. One of the things you can do is you can actually reach underneath the treadmill, underneath the running belt, and on top of the back side of this deck, and you scrape it with your fingernails. Pull that out, you'll notice there's a bunch of white debris on there. And that is wax coating that comes factory. So now that my deck is off, these are the bolts that held the deck down, and they screw into the 4 end shock absorbers. But on top of these shock absorbers are what's called these Tinnerman clips. And you can look and see that this one's already bent. I can hold this one up for you to see. So what happens is the deck sits on top of this Tinnerman clip, and then this bolt goes through the deck, through the Tinnerman clip, and then it threads through. In time, from the deck shifting and moving around, these Tinnerman clips get bent. We'll take these Tinnerman clips off. You can just pull these right out of these shock absorbers here. Even if they look good, just replace them. It's a cheap part. We pretty much have this tread stripped down to where we can start the cleaning process. And the best way to do it, if you're able, is an air hose and an air gun. Take this thing outside, or turn your pressure down on your air gun, run your air gun through there with your vacuum going so you can suck it up as you're blowing all this debris up. Down here on the belt guides, like, look at that. That's just all dirt, debris, body hair, you name it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this outside. We're going to give it a good spray down with the air hose and get this nice and clean before we start worrying about replacing the parts. Okay, so we have successfully broken down this frame all the way down to where we're ready for the new parts, cleaned the whole inside of this thing out, blew it all out, wiped it all down. It looks great. So now it's time to put the new parts on. I've got the new parts from our friends over at the Fitness Graveyard. If you need any fitness repair parts, contact fitnessgraveyard.com. They've got new and used parts for hard to find, new, old, you name it. So they hooked us up with a freshly cut deck for this tread. We got ourselves a new running belt. We got ourselves a new drive belt. And most importantly, some brand new Tinnerman clips. These are going to be great for on top of the shock absorbers, so we don't have to worry about our bolts not lining up and biting into those. So it is time to install some parts. This is an OEM belt. Always look on the inside of these. Some of them are directional, and this one is. If you look underneath it here, it's going to say run with an arrow. So that means it's got to run this way. I like to put my belt on the deck and then set the deck on there. Almost forgot to put my new Tinnerman clips on. Slide the Tinnerman clips on the old shocks. Be kind of snug, but that's a good thing. It's going to help the bolt line right up nice and neat. Tinnerman clips in, time to put the belt and deck on. Screws with our 4mm Allen wrench. Another little tip to get the hole lined up. I'll put that down through the deck and then down through the Tinnerman clip. And I just kind of wiggle it around to get him nice and centered there. I don't ever get these super tight until I get all 4 of them lined up. You can reach underneath of there just to make sure the bolt is sticking through the Tinnerman clip. What I mean by that is, if you look at these old clips, the bolt goes down through the deck and then threads through the bottom of the Tinnerman clip. When that's bent, there again, it can't line up right. But what can happen is this bolt can kind of go through sideways. This is kind of an extreme example, and you can start twisting it like this, and it bites on the top, and it'll just keep pushing this bottom fin down, where in reality it needs to go through the hole and suck the bottom fin up tight. So you can stick your finger through the little shock absorber there and make sure that it's going all the way through. These clips are hard to get lined up to begin with when they're brand new, let alone when they're used and bent. Now once all four are in, you can snug them up nice and tight. Not too tight, because you can strip the bottom of that Tinnerman clip, but you can get pretty snug. This particular belt is pre-treated, so we're not going to need to wax or silicone this. It's already silicone impregnated, so it is good to go. Okay, deck is on. Now it's time to put the front roller back on. Replacement drive belt. Put it on the roller before you put the roller in, so you know there again, you remember to hook it up. The drive belt also makes for a good little handle to hold on to when you're putting this back in, so you don't pinch your fingers. While we're talking front rollers here, let me give you a front roller tip in general. When you're looking at the rear of a treadmill, and if the belt is simply shifting from side to side, but running straight, that can be adjusted from the rear roller. If the treadmill belt is shifting too much to the right, if you tighten up the right side of the rear pin while it's moving, just maybe like a half a turn or so, you'll start to see it creep over that way a little bit more, because you're pulling the roller back, and so it's going to want to slide over that way on each side. If the treadmill belt is running crooked instead of just favoring one side, that's usually an issue with the front roller. So the front roller, in some cases, not the case here, the front roller is static. It's just held in one certain place. It's perfectly straight. Some treadmills will allow you to adjust the front roller. So if it's running crooked, that means you need to adjust your front roller and then tighten it up with the rear. So loosen up the rear roller a little bit, adjust the front roller to then the belt is running straight, and if it's just favoring side to side, then tighten up your rear roller. Now I can put my drive belt back on, and I can get that put over the drive motor pulley a lot easier since my Allen wrench is in there. Use my pliers to pry that up and pull my Allen wrench back out of the hole. Now I can just free spin the motor flywheel. You're going to hear it popping a little bit because it's finding its space in the grooves there on the pulleys. You want to take your flashlight and look down inside of there just to make sure that the drive belt is sitting centered on the drive pulley on the motor. Make sure it's not. Yep, and it's perfect. All the ribs are in the grooves. Same with on here. So that looks pretty centered and straight. Now it's time to put the rear roller back in. We marked our rear roller so we know what side to put it back into. So I've got my mark right here. I know it goes on this side. Should be able to drop it right in like that. So we dropped our rear roller in the back here. Now we're going to get our rear roller pin bolts started. There again, you want to start all these by hand, make sure they're lined up nice and neat. It can be easy to cross thread these, so a couple turns in there by hand. Once you get the one side started, it's a little bit easier because then that roller pin the hole can't move around because the other one's holding it in place. That nice and centered before we start to snug him up. And let's just get him kind of hand tight for now. Starting to feel like it's getting a little snug. We still got a ways to go, but now underneath of here on these treads, there's a piece of frame that's underneath of the deck that, think of it, it's almost shaped like almost like a little Pac-Man, little triangle Pac-Man there. And the belt, it's a belt guide. The belt needs to run inside of there. And what that belt guide does is it also helps keep the belt centered from going too far to the left or the right. But when you put this belt on there, sometimes what can happen is instead of the belt sitting inside of there on both sides, sometimes the belt can be underneath of there. And so this doesn't create any tension, so the belt can sit underneath there and the belt's going to rub underneath there. You'll hear it. It'll just make like a rubbing sound. So you'll want to reach underneath of there and make sure that that belt is inside of that cup. So that's what I'm talking about. It needs to be underneath, or it needs to be inside of that instead of sitting underneath of it like here. So now it's underneath there. I think the other side is probably the same. We'll feel that. Yep, and I can feel it here. It's underneath of the belt guide here as well. So you just push it up in there. And now it's sitting inside of this belt guide. Now that we've got the belt in place and the deck nice and secure and the rear roller nice and secure, now I'm going to power this thing up. We're going to run the belt, and we're not going to walk on it right now. I just want to make sure that it stays centered before we go snugging it up to where it needs to be. So now we're starting this thing up. We're going to let it run. I want to make sure at a slow speed I don't hear any dragging sounds. There again, if this belt is not properly put underneath the belt guide, you'll hear something like that. So running it at a slow speed, it's nice and quiet. I don't hear any chirping from the drive belt, which is great. Then I can start to kind of speed this thing up. So 3 miles an hour is a great speed to actually adjust the running belt. It's not too fast, whereas if you need to make a quick adjustment, the belt's not going to go all the way off to one side or the other. But right now I can see that this belt is favoring this side. So since I know I'm loose enough, I'm going to start turning it, and I'm going to start threading in this rear roller bolt. You heard a little bit of rubbing because it was starting to favor that side, but now that I've tighten this up, I'm pulling the rear roller out, which in turn is making this center itself. And there's some points of reference here on this, like you can look at the deck bolts. How far is the one side of the belt away from one deck bolt hole versus the other? Now it's looking pretty darn straight. So we're going to run this for a minute and just see how she looks. There again, it should be running straight. It might favor one side, but since there's no adjustment on the front roller, it should be running straight. If the front roller's crooked, it's going to be running at an angle. Good, that's looking pretty straight. So now I'm going to speed it up a little bit more. Take it up to about 5 or so. Just kind of see how it does with a little bit of speed. If you hear that thud is common with a new running belt being basically ran for the first time. There's some point on this belt they have to seam the belt together. And what you're hearing is since there's a little bit more thickness where that seam is, every time the belt goes over a roller, you'll hear that thud. Or the seam goes over the roller, you'll hear the thud. That eventually breaks in, kind of like a stiff baseball glove. Eventually that goes away. And you really don't even notice it when you're using the tread. So now at a faster speed, I can see that it is kind of favoring this side a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unthread this side because I don't know if I have it tight enough yet for a person to be walking on that. I won't know that until I actually get on it. And I'll do that once I have this down on the floor since my cart's kind of wobbly. So now I'm basically unthreading this side. In turn, the roller goes in so the belt shifts over a little bit. Belt looks nice and straight, so now it is time to put it off the cart, get it onto the floor, and then button this thing back up and do some more testing on it. Okay, so now that we got the tread down on the floor, we're going to do a few tests with it. One is we're going to test the incline, but while we do that, it's important that we need to grease the worm gear on the lift motor. So we're going to start this thing up. And then I'm going to go ahead and elevate it all the way up. So the lift motor is this guy right here. And this is what makes the tread go up and down. And it does so by having a threaded barrel at the bottom that's attached to the actual hinging incline carriage. And this motor turns a worm gear that threads it in and out and makes it go up and down. Well, that worm gear can get dry over time, and in turn making this thing work a little bit harder than it needs to. I like this lithium grease from Lucas Oil, but really any kind of lithium grease will do. I like the white stuff because a lot of times we work in facilities and having a dark colored grease can stain and make a mess. So I just put a little bit on my finger and dab it onto the worm gear right into the threads. Right now with it elevated, all the threads are exposed, so it's easy just to get a little bit of this on the threads. Now I will tell you that these threads on the worm gear will time to time be full of metal shavings just from going up and down and metal shavings sticking to the grease. there's a bunch of reasons why you could have metal shavings on that, but so just be careful when you go to rub your finger on there. Don't rub it real hard because you'll end up with a slither in your finger. It's happened many times to me. So I'm pretty ginger on this. I just kind of dab it on there. And even if there are little metal slithers, they're not going to stick into my finger. And then by just putting some of that on there and taking it up and down once or twice, it's going to work itself into the barrel. Be nice and greased up, and it'll go up and down nice and easy. Next up, we're going to do a walk test on here because I want to see if the belt needs tightened up. When you run, you put about twice your body weight in force down onto the belt, which in turn can make it slip or feel like it's skipping or grabbing. So the best way to just test if you got your belt tight enough is kind of hold onto the handle. I'll illustrate it first without walking on it. I'll go and I'll plant my heel down onto the front of the belt, but also kind of brace myself here on the belt or on the handlebars. And that way I've got leverage to see if I can make the belt slip. And I can. I don't know if we're able to pick that up on the camera or not, but basically what happens is, for a split second, the running belt stops, but the front roller continues to turn from the force or the power from the motor. So that little slipping that you hear is basically the rollers aren't tight enough on the belt. So the front roller is just slipping on the inside of the belt and not making it turn. At that point, I know I need to snug this up. So I'll go a turn on this on both sides. And if I know I'm starting my Allen wrench right here, I'm going to spin him all the way around right to that spot. And then I'm going to immediately go over to this side, spin him around to that spot. In theory, this should continue to run nice and centered because I've turned both of these the exact amount of turns on each side. Same thing, start walking. Can't make it slip. So at that point, I know I'm not too tight because I've only gone one turn. At that point, for just good measure, I'm going to go one more half turn on both sides. I know that's plenty snug. I'm going to speed this up to about 6 miles an hour, and I'm just going to verify that we're not favoring one side over the other. Maybe about a quarter turn on this side, so I can have the belt go over that way just a tiny bit, and I think we're there, guys. At this point, really all I have left to do is put the hood cover back on, some of the plastic pieces, the end caps. I got to put the belt guides back on, but that's all just a quick reverse order thing. But this is in general how you should be putting belts and decks and dry belts on treadmills, especially these Life Fitness ones. I really hope this helped. If you need anything parts-wise, visit fitnessgraveyard.com. And if you certainly need any troubleshooting things, or if you're in the market for a new piece of equipment, no matter where you live, visit treadhero.com and we'll help you guys out.